Thanks to those that have joined our webinar. Can you just bear with us while we wait for any other attendees that may be wanting to join? Also, from the people that have joined, can anybody just give me a confirmation that you can hear me clearly and the sound is at the right volume and is not distorted? Thanks, Ashley, for that confirmation. Thanks, Taituria, for that confirmation. So we'll just wait one more minute before we start, just to see if anyone else wants to attend. And can I just get confirmation that you can see the Medtech logo? Great, thank you. Great, thanks, Anne. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ron Walters, and I'm a product specialist here at Medtech. Today, we'll be looking at the capitated-based funding switchover enhancements. We will take any questions at the end of the presentation and try to address as many as we can. You can submit at any time your questions using the online chat screen on the GoToWebinar panel. If we don't answer your questions today, please be reassured we will follow up via email after the webinar. If you are experiencing any sound quality issues, we suggest you leave the webinar and reconnect again. That often solves the issue. We'll now begin the webinar. Okay, so just going over the agenda that we're wanting to cover today. So we'll start with the capitated-based funding switchover design overview. So this will provide a high-level understanding of the switchover approach taken, followed by tracking and managing the CBF switchover, key points on the switchover tracker and the management of the switchover, what needs to be actioned by practices prior to the 1st of April 2019. So we'll just give an overview of the actions which must be taken to ensure that practices do not miss out on funding from the 1st of April 2019. And then we'll demo from Medtech32, changes made to the PMS to support the switchover, enrollment maintenance buttons and how funding is set for patients, and auto synchronization of provider and CPN facility numbers. So just a brief overview of those items from the PMS itself. We'll then end with a Q&A session. Okay. Okay, starting with the CBF switchover design overview. Okay, so from the outset of the project, the whole approach was that we would break, we wanted to tackle two issues. The first one is that the enrollments from the PMS and the enrollments from NES were out of sync. So this is where the whole bulk synchronization of enrollments has been put forward. and involves the synchronization of all existing enrollment information to ensure that the enrollment which is being used as the basis for funding from NES matches the enrollment from the PMS. So when the bulk synchronization process runs, it will synchronize all enrollments where the PMS and NES have the same corresponding enrollment status. That is, both have a status which shows that the patient being processed has a full enrollment. Once a match is confirmed, the system will then import the enrollment information from NES to the PMS and then update NES with the provider CPN and facility number currently associated with that enrollment. Finally, funding will be derived from the enrollment based on a combination of the enrollment details and the existing quarterly funding details. The second thing that the process will do is that it will look for any mismatched enrollments. So if the PMS enrollment status is different to the enrollment status from NES, then a notification will be generated from the NES notification inbox for the practice to review and update the enrollment accordingly. Okay, so the first part is looking at the bulk synchronization of all the enrollments at the practice. The second part of the design is to prevent existing and future enrollments from going out of sync. So the way that this was achieved was by disabling all patient register enrollment fields after the enrollment has been synchronized. So that's any enrollment that doesn't have an enrollment ID. And this is required to prevent changes being made to the PMS enrollment without changing the NES enrollment. Second, we have introduced new enrollment maintenance buttons, which you can see here. So these newly introduced enrollment maintenance buttons allow the practice to update both enrollments from both the PMS and NES with a single action. Thus, this will save time for the practice and makes the enrollment management process seamless. And finally, the system will auto-synchronize any changes to the provider CPN and facility number associated with a given enrollment from the PMS. So we will view these changes in more depth during the demo component of the webinar. Great, so the next topic that I wanted to discuss was the tracking and management of the CBF switchover. So to track the switchover, a new CBF switchover tab has been added to the NES setup window. This can be accessed from Setup, Connected Health Information Services, NES Setup, and then by selecting the CBF switchover tab. This allows you to track the progress of the automated CBF switchover process. Updates the list of staff members, allows you to update the list of staff members who will receive staff tasks, advising of the outcome of the switchover when completed, and to access the CBF switchover log, which contains any errors and a summary of each switchover period completed. At the top of the tab, there is a summary of the operations that the auto switchover will process. And below this is a status which provides the practice with details of which stage of the switchover they're at. The possible statuses that will appear are scheduled to run, which appears when a processing time slot has been allocated, switchover in progress, which appears when the switchover has been initiated, and one of the 4 possible completed statuses. The practices will see one of these depending on if there were any exceptions or processing errors, or a combination of both recorded during the switchover. Please note, we are processing enrollments in 2 phases. For phase 1, prior to the 1st of April 2019, all active patients with an NHI, an enrollment status, and an enrollment ID will be processed. Phase 2, from the 1st of April 2019, all active patients with an NHI, an enrollment status, and no enrollment ID will be processed. This means that all practices should be at the switchover in progress stage a day after upgrading and will remain in this status until the 1st of April. Managing the switchover. So below the status section is the staff task 2 field, which defaults to all staff members who currently have either system admin and or setup access rights at the time of upgrading. The staff members who are ticked when the switchover completes will receive a single task summarizing all the exceptions, errors that need to be reviewed. The exceptions will be reviewed from the NES notifications inbox, and the errors can be managed from the view log button. An example of the staff task that gets generated is here. So basically it's just a summary of the switchover process once in a completed state. So in order to actually review what has been those exceptions and errors, you have to go to the notifications inbox for the exceptions and the log for any errors. Okay. Finally, the view log button, when pressed, will display a list of all processing and connection errors that were logged during the enrollment synchronization, a summary of the switchover that was performed. So every time a switchover is performed during a nightly period, whether it's completed the whole process or just a part of it, it will then provide a summary. Also, a summary can be used to determine if the pre-April processing has completed, and this can be achieved by filtering the log for only processed summaries. And if you see on the right-hand side, if you open up the filter logs section of the log, it will then have an option to select a level, and if you select information and press OK, you'll then get a list as shown. As shown in the image over here, where you can see when the process started, how many patients it processed, the number of exceptions, and the number of errors. So the key thing to look out for is how many the changes in patients being processed. So as you can see from the bottom, you can see 18,946. A day later, there was 21,669, which is a fair amount of patients processed. And then the following processing day, it had 21,678. So as you can see, there's very little in terms of the number of patients processed between the 14th and the 15th. So that indicates that their practice has processed all the patients that have an enrollment ID prior to the 1st of April. As soon as the 1st of April hits, it's then going to process the remaining patients, and then a completed status will appear. Okay, just a note on the small changes. So you will still see some changes, and this is due to the fact that any new or existing enrollments that have had an enrollment ID added since the last time the switchover processed, they will then be processed. So it's any changes to that list of patients who fall within the category of having an enrollment ID. That's why the numbers will increase a little bit. Great. Okay, so what needs to be actioned by practices prior to the 1st of April? So prior to the 1st of April, there's two recommendations. So two things that are very important for all practices to action in order to prevent any loss of funding. So the first one is to review and update any notifications that have resulted from the enrollment synchronization process. And also to review and update any enrollments which are missing an enrollment ID using the query builder. So these two lists are important, as when the process completes, the switchover, the synchronization process completes, it's these patients, we don't have any sufficient details, or we don't know the exact patient, the exact enrollment that needs to be set for that patient. So it requires the practice to review that enrollment and determine exactly what status should be placed for that patient. Once that's been actioned for the notifications, then the funding will be set accordingly. And for the list of patients who do not have an enrollment ID, it's very important for the practice to review those patients using the query builder, which I'll cover soon, so that we can get an enrollment ID in there, which will confirm that that patient has a valid enrollment from both NES and the PMS. Okay, so the query that that can be used has been pre-built by us, and it's called missing NES enrollment information. So what this query will do is quite simply look for all patients that I've confirmed enrolled or pre-enrolled, which are missing an enrollment ID, which means that if that patient doesn't have a corresponding enrollment from NES after the 1st of April, they will then not be funded, because from the 1st of April, all funding is going to be set by the enrollment from NES. Just a note here, the query has the ID for merge item within the query itself, which means that you can just select any individual record from the list and press the up arrow button, which allows you to quickly work through the list and synchronize those patients. Okay. Okay, so we are up to the demo. I might answer a few questions that have come through. The first one, how do you pre-enroll a child that has been pre-enrolled in another city, being Wellington here in Whanganui? So the pre-enrollment of a child that has been pre-enrolled. So from my understanding, you would just run through so the enrollment side of things hasn't changed. You would just go to the NHI button as long as that patient's identity has been validated from your from the NES web portal. Then you can go to the enrollment page, which will then allow you to select pre-enrollment and accept the declarations and press OK. That should then allow that transfer of that patient who was pre-enrolled from a different system. Okay, I see. Taituria, so it throws an error. Okay, Taituria, I'll touch base with you after the webinar and we can go through that. Great. The other question that's come up is, how long will the switchover take? So it will be approximately 250 patients per 15 minutes. And that's approximated because we're not too sure how the timings will be, or the processing rate will be, as more and more practices get on and process their patients. So it's all dependent on how many practices are processing at the time of running, but you can use that as a guide. So 250 patients per 15 minutes. So approximately 1,000 per hour, and then you can work out how many patients who fall under that category of having an enrollment status are active and have an NHI and an enrollment ID. So that will give you a guide of how many you would process prior to the 1st of April, and then missing an enrollment ID to give how many will be processing after the 1st of April. So it's a it's just reviewing what patients you have at the practice and going through it systematically to work out the timings. Okay, I see. Okay, thanks for that clarification, Anne. I'll work with Taituria to go through that, but I'll just mention that. So NES doesn't actually allow a second pre-enrollment. If the new practice has an enrollment form for the baby, they can just enroll the baby. Okay, so Taituria, just to confirm, I have gotten confirmation that you just perform a full enrollment in that situation. Great. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll just run through the demo. Just bear with me as I get set up. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so for the demo, what we're going to do is just run through those scenarios. Okay, so from the agenda, the first one that I'm going to show you is just changes that can be expected from the system when the practice upgrades, which I'm sure a lot of you have already seen. So just with this demo patient here, I can show you that when the practice upgrades, which you've all probably seen, they will have a message at the bottom which says basically the CBF switchover has not been processed for this patient, and it advises that staff member to press the sync button above to manually process the switchover. So the next steps would be to press the sync button, or the staff member can then can wait for the bulk switchover to run. But it is definitely recommended to hit the sync button to so that the correct funding is applied. This is test data, so it's not correct. It's just been mocked up so that we can display it. But that's essentially what you're going to see for all patients who haven't been processed yet, and it's just there to indicate that a switchover still needs to be performed for that patient. Cool. So the other changes that we can see, so I'll just take you through to the switchover tracker. So from setup, connected health information services, NES setup, CBF switchover. So this is what we discussed during the slide. It does give you the ability to change who's in the list. And once it sets a completed status, then we can send those staff members will receive a staff task, which will outline the amount of patients who have been processed, who have had a notification, and who have errors. Cool. And then from the view log, as discussed previously, from the filter, we can view the number of switchover processes they've run. And as you can see here, the started gives you, as you can see with this switchover, it's run twice, and it's gives you a summary of when it started, when it ended, the scheduled switchover, the amount of patients who were processed, exceptions, sorry, it's a bit crammed, and the errors that were processed. And if you wanted to review the actual errors, which it doesn't look like there are any, you can then select accordingly. Okay, so no errors. So there are no errors for this processing, but we definitely do have notifications, which we'll go to now. Okay, so module inbox, notifications inbox. Okay, so these are the types of notifications that you can see. Well, we've only got one here. And it works the same way that current notifications work, in that you open it and it will appear with the actions that should be taken. So in this case, the patient should be enrolled at the so a suggested action, and whether the system has taken an action from during the switchover. Great. Cool. So now we'll go through the different the changes, the new buttons that have been defined. Okay, so the very first thing that I'll show you is that the sync button, or the buttons, will only be active in certain scenarios. So in this scenario, as you can see, the sync button isn't active due to the fact that we do not have an enrollment status, a date confirmed, or a method of enrollment. As soon as we add these in and we save it, cancel, the sync button becomes active. So this patient hasn't been enrolled, so I'm pressing the sync button. It will get no enrollment back from NES and will present this message accordingly. Okay, so just to go through that process. Okay, as you can see here, this patient has been synchronized already, and now I'm wanting to enroll them. I press the enroll patient button, select enroll, select the declaration that I agree to the declaration or the patient agrees, and then save. Just before I save, I'll just mention here that the date confirmed can be changed from here. Obviously, it's really important for this to be accurate, to be matching whatever's on the form as per the auditing side of things. So it's really important that practices do review these. So they've got two chances to change them before it locks everything down. And finally, we've got the enrollment method, which is defaulted to form because there's no other method. Okay, so we change it, press save. Great. Cool. And as you can see, it's set the enrollment, the funding for the 1st of April, because they didn't have an enrollment previously and no funding. And it's subsequently brought over the start date and expiry date. Just a note on the funding end date. So the funding end date will be set to the last day of the month of the same as the enrollment expiry date. Cool. I'll bring up another patient for a re-enroll. So as we can see here, this patient, excuse me, has a enrollment start date of 1st of March 2019 and has an enrollment expiry date of 4th March 2022. So when I re-enroll this patient, so I select the re-enrollment date and say I did the re-enrollment over the phone. Following the enrollment service process. It's not valid. Okay, my data's not good, so we can't see that. I can just try to see if I can add a different provider. Okay, we'll try once more. Phone. Yep, okay. So as long as you've got the right re-enrollment, right provider data in there or provider associated with that patient, it will then submit that re-enrollment. Okay, and as you can see, it's been extended to the last day. I think it was already that. So if it was April, then it will be the end of April and so forth. But as you can see, the expiry date has been extended accordingly. Finally, the end enrollment for this patient. So in the event the patient transfers out, it will default the registration status to whatever's been set. I'll just show that. So the default registration status is picking up whatever's been set from this section. So in this case, I've selected transferred out, so it's defaults to transferred. If I had this set to anything else, that would then default that to that value accordingly. Okay. Cool. So the end enrollment has then been performed, and then we can remove recalls as per usual. Finally, the last patient to check, to go through is a full enrollment, or the last operation to go through is a full enrollment. Just make sure I've got enrollment. Great. So as you can see there, I press the synchronize this button and it's extended the funding accordingly. So the full enrollment, you might have noticed the button wasn't active for the other patients, and that's because it will only be active for patients who are newborn preliminary enrollment. So I'm pressing the full enrollment button. We then have the option to select the date confirmed. Again, if need be, we can set it to a previous date. And then select form. It's not successful. Okay, sorry. So we've already enrolled this patient multiple times. Again, bad data. But the whole point is that it would then update that patient's enrollment, change the enrollment status to confirmed enrolled, and set the expiry date accordingly. Great. Okay, so I just wanted to also quickly touch on the quick query builder that we're looking at. Please, if you have any questions, just put them in the questions box. So from the query store, you'll see a folder called QB folder, missing NES enrollment information. So the missing NES enrollment information gives you a list of all patients who are confirmed enrolled, pre-enrolled, have a blank enrollment ID, and are active, and then provides a series of outputs, a series of attributes. So this can be modified by practices. You can essentially do anything you want with these queries. It's just there as a template to get you started. And as I mentioned before, the ID for merge, when you place into any of the queries, it gives you the ability to place a patient directly on the pallet so that you can action any issues with that patient's enrollment. So in this case, this patient has been enrolled and they from the PMS, but they most likely don't have an enrollment from NES. Yep. So this is one of the scenarios which if the practice doesn't enroll that patient and they are fully funded currently, they will then lose funding even though they should be receiving that. Yep. Apologies for that. Okay, and then let me see. Should be open. Okay, and I'll just show the last query. So the last query allows you to get again, it's a template that you can modify. But the whole point of this query is so that you can get a list of all the patients who are enrolled at the practice. So pre-enrolled or have a full enrollment. And you can see of those patients who are funded, who are not funded, who has an enrollment ID, who doesn't, and you have the means to export this list and manipulate it from something like Excel. So it gives you more control over the data that's outputted, and then it will also help with cross-referencing against any PHO reports that you may receive. Sorry, that may be received by practices. So those are the queries. Just so from the last topic is the auto synchronization of provider CPN and facility numbers. So the areas which get changed or which get have the CPN and facility number captured or synchronized with NES, the provider field. So in the past, this was not done, and the CPN and facility numbers went out of synchronization. So if I select Sam Eves for this patient, which would then allow me to enroll. external provider. Okay. Okay, so this patient doesn't have an enrollment. So just a key thing to note there, this will only perform the CPN facility number sync if it has an enrollment. So I'll just find a patient that has an enrollment so I can demo that. Okay. So if I change this patient to Joan. Okay, that patient's unenrolled, my apologies. We did that earlier. Okay, F3, just make sure, yep. There we go. Okay, so you receive a message to confirm that you're happy to change that enrollment, that provider, and this will result in the, yes, okay, that wasn't it. Change, do you wish to update the associated, yes. Okay, and it will confirm that you're wanting to update and process the CPN and facility number. Okay, and finally from the staff setup, Joan Baker, if I made any changes to the location, it will then present a message asking if I'm wanting to synchronize the change to NES. So what this will essentially do is for all those enrollments that are associated with that staff member, they will then have the location, so the facility number, updated from NES. Great, and the same thing will happen. Okay, and the same thing will happen if I made any change to the HPI number, CPN HPI number. The last item to cover is the bulk provider update. So previously practices didn't have the ability to change the provider for all patients. So all patients under a given provider to another provider. So in the scenario would be a provider has left the practice and now we're wanting to set a new provider for all those patients. So we've now got a bulk provider update utility, which allows me to change all of Joan or whoever the old providers is to Sam, and that will process accordingly. So ask me if I'm wanting to go ahead. If I press yes, it will do two things. So it'll make the change from the patient register, and it will also synchronize the CPN and facility number for that staff member, for those patients who have an enrollment. Cool. Okay, and the final place, which is processed, is location settings. So if I make a change to the HPI facility number, okay, I don't have it. It will then ask me, I don't have a example, but if you make a change, it will then present a warning message to ensure that you talk to your PHO or the Ministry of Health prior to making this change, because there's potentially a lot of records that need to be changed, and that can be managed from the Ministry of Health's end. Great, so that covers the functionality from the PMS. We will now move on to the Q&A session. Let's bring up. Okay, let's just bring up the next. Okay. Okay, so we're at the Q&A session. So I'll just see if I can go through a few of these questions. Great. So another question, can you complete enrollment via NES, or do you have to enroll in PMS first? Yes, you can go straight to NES and complete the enrollment. So either way, if you want to just enter that data in the PMS first and then go to NES to save the enrollment, it won't stop you either way. So do you use the full enrollment icon when enrolling new patients to the practice? Yes, you do. So the, not when enrolling new patients. So just a key point to note, and I'll bring up the environment so that we can talk about it from there. So the new enrollment buttons, they're just for maintaining the enrollment as of now. So for any new patients, you still need to go through the process of validating their identity. So searching for their identity, validating their identity, and performing a full enroll. It's possibly something we can look at adding later, but at this point in time, it's just the maintenance of the enrollment that we've implemented, and the full enrollment button is just for those patients that already have a pre-enrollment. I hope that answers your question, Joanne. So do you have a copy of those query builds on the website? No, we do not. So only the practice, so the practices that upgrade, they will have it pre-defined. It's the, I think the criteria is outlined in the release notes, but another way of getting it is just to export it from a practices system. So I hope that's helped, that's answered your question, Wade. So another question from Joanne. What if the provider for your practice is under the medical center, not individual provider? As long as there's no issues with the number that's inputted, it should allow you to still submit. It won't give you an error. I think we did come across that issue during our beta, and we got it resolved. So from Ashley, so do you sync new enrollments once enrolled? So new enrollments don't need to be synced. The sync button offers, the sync button offers a number of benefits. The first is that you can manually sync a patient, so you don't have to wait for the switchover to get to that patient and process them. So it can set everything correctly. And the second thing that it does is if there is any changes from the ministry's end, the NES side, then it can synchronize those changes. So those changes that haven't been actioned from the system. And the the other thing is if there's any issues with the enrollment, whatever's being applied, using the sync button will rectify that. But do you sync new enrollments? Yeah, so there's no need to sync new enrollments to answer your question. So Ashley's asked another question, difference between errors and exceptions. Okay, so the exceptions are those when the bulk enrollment switchover synchronization is occurring, every patient that it checks, it's going to see if that patient's enrollment status, say they have a confirmed enrollment, has a corresponding enrollment status which matches that confirmed enrollment from NES. So if I gave an example, a confirmed enrollment from the PMS of C will have a corresponding enrollment from NES, which would mean it's a match. Now, if that confirmed enrollment from the PMS did not have a enrollment from NES, say it returned no enrollment, then that would be an exception, so a mismatch. Anything where there's a mismatch in enrollment statuses will result in an exception being logged. Anything where there is a match of enrollment status will mean that that patient's enrollment will be processed. I hope that's answered your question, Ashley. And the errors, the errors will occur when if there's a connection issue. So imagine that the switchover or the synchronization is occurring at night, and for whatever reason it's lost connection to the NES server, it will then log an error. If a patient for whatever reason can't be cannot be processed. Maybe it just doesn't have sufficient details, then it will log an error. Yeah, so the errors are specifically I can't process because of some issue with the data or connection to NES, whereas an exception is where we've just got a mismatch in enrollment status. Okay, another one from Ashley. Both from Lynn, not working properly for her. Is there a copy of this presentation recorded? Yes, we will be recording this presentation and I'm putting it up on our website, Helen. Okay, so I'll follow up with Ashley on something not working for both you and Lynn. When I try to do the manual enrollment, I get a read timeout error. Now that read timeout error is if you're doing a manual enrollment, so this is from the NES web portal, that's most likely going to be due to the fact that the system can't communicate with NES at that time or perform that operation. So Gerard, I can get in contact with you just to go through that if need be. Sorry, Ashley, you want me to re-clarify error? Can you email? Okay, thanks, Ashley. Yep, sorry, I missed that. So thanks, can you email us an explanation of what you just said with examples? Okay, so, okay, exceptions and errors. Yes, sure, I can email the group with the difference between exceptions and errors. Yep, I'll send that through to everyone. Okay, awesome. Are there any other questions? We're doing quite well for time. I guess we've got 10 more minutes if anybody needs me to demonstrate anything, or if you want to get clarity. Maybe I'll just hit on one point just so that everybody's clear. Let me jump back a bit. So if we go forward a bit. So one thing that I want to make sure that everyone's clear about is the processing prior to the 1st of April. So essentially we need to ensure that all practices go through those two lists, the notifications and the query builder. And once those two lists have been actioned, then we can be confident that that the practices won't miss out on enrollments. Won't miss out on funding for those enrollments that are currently confirmed enrolled from the PMS and funded but don't have enrollment IDs. So that's a key thing just to take home and make sure the practices are doing prior to the 1st of April. And from what I've seen out at practices and speaking to practices, there shouldn't be too many on this list. I think the highest I've seen is maybe 40. But yeah, it's important that those two tasks are performed prior to the 1st of April. Okay, I've got another, Suana, I hope I pronounced your name right. Patients showed as transferred out in PMS but not in NES. We couldn't end enrollment in NES and enrollment funding section. All new functions were grayed out. Yes, so Suana, that is a known issue that we're grappling with at the moment. So in the event that that the enrollment that was ended from NES did not result in the enrollment from the PMS ending, we don't have any functionality right now to remove that enrollment status, but we are going to put through a change which will allow for the end for one of the buttons to make that end enrollment and allow you to choose whether you're wanting to have that unenrollment appear from that record. Can I not unenroll a patient? Yep, same with you, Margot. Why can I not unenroll a patient who comes up with an error? So that error is probably stating that there's no enrollment for that patient from NES. So there, as I mentioned previously to Suana, we that is a issue at the moment, and we are looking to fix that, where we're going to have the means to end the enrollment, even if there isn't an enrollment in NES. So for the time being, it would be good to record those and set them aside until we've got a fix in there. Or you can, if it is causing problems, you can contact our support desk and we can help you manage those enrollments. Great. So just to summarize before we end, so key things to note is that we do have 2 phases for the switchover. So one phase where the first phase where we're only processing those patients with an enrollment ID populated. And then after the 1st of April, we're processing those patients that don't have an enrollment ID. So the key thing there is in order to check that that the majority or the current patient enrollments at the practice have been processed for the 1st of April and has been completed, is by going into the view log button, opening up the filter, selecting information for the level. That will then give you the summaries, and then you can tell from the summaries whether any new lots of patients are being processed, and if there's very few, then you know that it has been completed for that practice. Following that, it's important that practices then go through each of those lists, so the notification lists, and correct, update, make changes to ensure that those patients are going to receive funding or are ended correctly, and go through the query builder list to ensure that those patients who are missing enrollment IDs can be actioned and ensure that funding isn't lost for those patients. So those are the key take-home messages, and I will. There was a question there to get a document or a paragraph to outline what the difference is between exceptions and errors, which I'm happy to do, and I'll send out to the group. If there's no more questions, we'll conclude. Okay. So thank you all for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it useful. The webinar and associated notes and documents will be uploaded to our webinar library, so for future viewing. This usually takes a few days. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us via email. And thanks for listening.